Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler.
Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler. Welcome everyone joining us on Pahrump Station, where the First Amendment lives, 97.7 FM, and those streaming worldwide on the NevadaPatriot.com, Rumble, YouTube, and Godfather.media. We appreciate you. This week, you don't have to hear me griping by myself. A very special guest, many of you know, graciously agreed to join me, and if I'm guessing, we're fired up about some of the exact same things. Terrible laws with dire consequences are being proposed as we speak. These bills being looked at in Carson City seemingly affect every aspect of our lives. Today, though, we're focusing on some bad ones that are specifically damaging to our elections. Locally, statewide, and even nationally, the ramifications are potentially horrible. But like we always say on our show, knowledge is power. The more we know, the more we can get on board to resist bad policies. So, here with me in studio, I'm proud to introduce our Nye County Clerk and man of integrity, Mark Kampf. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Definitely, man. Good to have you finally. For the people who don't know about you, even though you're pretty recognizable, even on a nationwide media scale, you know, Nye County's been on the radar in recent months and seasons. So with that being said, though, let everyone know a bit about you, Mark.
Well, I've been the Nye County Clerk since August 5th. I was appointed to take over the job when Sandra Merlino retired before the end of her term. And I was elected to be clerk in the last election, so I've actually been in the job since August 5th.
Right.
I've been a resident of Nye County since 2014, married to Brenda, who's very active in the Daughters of the American Revolution.
That's right.
So she's active in this community. And I've been active in the Republican Party, and I even served a little bit as treasurer for about 3 months
Right.
when John Perdant resigned and I was asked to step up. It was a little bit of a challenge because it was right in the middle of an election, and of course it got a lot of attention because of the nature of the appointment. But I do feel that I was the right person to step in at the time.
Yeah, full disclosure, I believe the same exact thing. And just so our listeners know, as a former candidate myself, the advantage of that taking on a full-time job of the treasurer while you're campaigning for another position, that's no advantage in that election cycle because, you know, the time commitments and all the stuff that it takes to be successful in your campaign. You actually did the county a solid, so I think we all owe you on that one for sure, Mark.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and same thing, you know, with your clerk appointment, obvious choice for the interim clerk for that period before you finally took seat after the general election. It would have made almost zero sense to have another person in that spot to then have to be, you know, the transition would have been even more awkward than it was, in my opinion.
It sure did have a serious impact on my life, that's for sure.
Yeah, it did. So obviously, you know, for the listeners out there that don't realize that the Nye County Clerk has obviously more duties and more responsibilities than merely presiding over elections. You know, do you want to care to kind of enlighten them on some of the other aspects of your job before we kind of dive into some of the meat and potatoes about the election season approaching here?
Well, sure. Let's talk about the elections, and that starts really from the registering voters all the way to the conducting of the election.
Right.
In the next year, we're going to be in the process of working with the Secretary of State to implement a new voter registration and election management system. Yeah. They're going to get it's going to be a top-down sort of statewide process, which I'm actually looking forward to because the system we have right now is pretty bad. Gotcha. But we also do marriage licenses. If you want a marriage license, you get it from us.
Right.
If you want to be a marriage officiant, you get it from us. If you have a business and you want to go under a fictitious firm name,
yeah, that's right.
We take you come to us for that application. We also, I'm the ex officio clerk of the Board of County Commissioners, so I'm responsible for, and my team, for taking the minutes of the Board of County Commissioners and conducting hearings, swearing in people who are testifying in front of the board. I'm also the ex officio clerk of the Board of Equalization and the Debt Management Commission.
Right.
In addition, I'm the clerk of courts. However, there's a bit of a issue in the county right now relative to who is responsible for the clerk of courts, and I'd like to see that kind of get resolved.
Yeah.
And get that moved over to the 5th District Judicial Court.
Yeah, because right now, like when I get in the bail bonds business, discharge paperwork for active bonds that I'm on with criminal cases, I notice that they're always coming from your office. So
right.
That's something that could be changed in the near future, or
well, on August 3rd,
reallocating.
On August 3rd of 2021, the Board of County Commissioners voted to create a position called the court administrator. And in creating that position, what they did is basically had those deputy clerks effectively reporting to that function.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, the previous clerk didn't want to make that change, and so I am supportive of that change.
Gotcha. And I'd assume in both of your positions, from when you were appointed treasurer in that gap, you had certain amounts of things that are kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of dropped in your lap that you have to adapt and you have to deal with head on. So
yeah, I've been quite a few of those things, inheriting some issues with the way our precincts were done. I'm not real happy the way the commissioners, districts, and the school board district was done. It created some very unique precincts that we're going to have to live with for the next 10 years.
Yeah, right.
And some precincts with small numbers of people that have to exist as unique just because of the way that handled. But what I'm doing is working on getting the precincts fixed, because we do have some problems. We've been lucky to not have elections in some of these town boards and general improvement districts, and those need to be fixed before we get into anything else.
And in general, probably what I hear from people, laypersons, and myself, I consider myself somewhat of a layperson with certain issues when it comes to voter rolls, things like that. Any updates on the voter rolls getting cleared up, or specific obstacles that are kind of preventing that from happening, or at least some hopefully light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, it's kind of interesting because right now we're doing two different kind of communications with people. Number one, we're reaching out to the over 7,000 voters who had not voted in the last election.
Yeah.
And by not voting in that last election, we send them a notice saying, hey, are you still there?
Yeah.
Do you still live at this address? Are you still in this county? And if they don't reply, then they're put in an inactive status.
Gotcha.
Now, all they've got to do is call or show up to vote, and they get made active. But if they don't vote in 2 consecutive general elections, we inactivate those voters. And we're actually in the process of inactivating about 4,000 voters who were made inactive, and now they're being removed from the voter rolls because they didn't vote in 2 general elections.
Right.
We also have a lot of voters that we find out through the access to the ERIC system, and like it or not, opinions about it, being funded by George Soros, I understand all that. But it is a tool for us to use to find people who appear on the list in 2 different states and 2 different counties. And so we're sending out an additional almost 6,000 letters to those individuals that look like they may have moved. But of course, people, when they move out of this county, 50% of them don't fill out a change of address form. They just pick up and leave and go. Yeah. And so they're left on the voter rolls. So, it's a very active process. Once we go through that process, then we're going to start doing a lot more targeted investigation of voters that just don't seem to fit, and there's a lot of ways we have to reach out to them and get information.
This is a nonpartisan concern that citizens should want fair, transparent and common sense elections. And these techniques, these tactics, it seems perfectly common sense, because the way that the state laws change, and with the massive amounts of mail-in ballots and things like that, we have to be extra vigilant to make sure that our elections are fair. And I think common sense approaches like this makes total sense. And like you said, there's not a huge encumbrance for people to get back on effectively on the voter rolls. It's not that hard to do if you are a real legitimate legal voter.
Right.
There's no hoops to jump through. You're not, in my opinion, you're not being disenfranchised or discouraged at all. I mean, compared to the hoops that we jump through for normal life and having to show our IDs in different places like that, voting seems to be one of the easier things. Even with changes, even with implementations like this, it seems to be a super easy life task that anybody can do, as long as they're a real live person who really has a right to vote. So
yeah, there's actually a bill out there now that would add the voter registration decision, either to remove yourself from the voter rolls or to add yourself to the voter rolls as part of signing a real estate agreement.
yeah.
But in 2025, just about every state agency where someone goes to them for benefits, if someone isn't registered to vote, they will be encouraging them to register to vote as part of that process. The problem I have with it is that the documentation requirements and the knowledge that those people have of their requirements to not sign up to vote, particularly if they're a non-citizen, that it's not very clear to certain people. And I had 2 people this election cycle reach out to me and say, hey, I went to get my driver's license even though I have a green card, and by not opting out, I got registered to vote.
I got jumped into the mix. Yeah, and that's everyone with common sense and everyone who wants a fair election would think that that's not good, right? Having somebody that's not legitimate, leaving it on the person who's not a legitimate voting candidate to have to be opting out of something in order to not be enrolled as a voter. That's just common sense. That's bad.
Yes. Well, again, that's the direction this state went in the last assembly, and it's it's getting worse this time around. The rest of the clerks acknowledge that this happens, but they're unwilling to acknowledge that it's more than just a few isolated instances, and I find that very hard to believe, because where there's smoke, there's fire, and we're a small county here. You can imagine what happens in a larger county.
Yeah,
and I've just seen examples where the documentation necessary to get an ID and register to vote is pretty flimsy.
Yeah.
So hopefully some of the bills that require voter ID will be put forward, and I know Greg Hafen and Bert Gurr and Pete Goitia, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yep, Goitia.
They're pushing for those kinds of bills where you can't submit a paper ballot in the mail on election day and drop it off and hope that it's going to make it in time, to pull back those deadlines to the end of early voting, allowing more time for those ballots to get in. But again, the basic socialist agenda in our assembly and Senate is to basically have pretty much of a free-for-all, and it's very concerning.
We're one representative away, losing one representative away, at least on the Republican side, from letting the other side have a super majority where they could literally almost cram so many things right down our throats, despite the fact that we hopefully have a governor now that can see if some of these bad bills skip in and slip through the cracks and manage to get voted on the floor, passed by both chambers. Hopefully has the guts to veto some of these bad ones. I
think we're going to see lots of vetoes out of him. I think they're living in kind of a dream world up there in the assembly and the legislature, that this is just going to be a walk in the park on a sunny day. Yeah. And many of them forget the fact that we have a Republican governor who's a conservative and will veto.
And he's going to be accountable to his voters, to his constituents, the people that helped him get in there. And just for the common sense Nevadans, you talk to anybody with half an ounce of common sense, whether they're Democrat, Republican, nonpartisan, I don't see anybody willing to die on a hill to have untrustworthy, haphazard, chaotic elections. So it's just a common sense thing for him. If some of these bills that we're going to probably talk about will, in any form that they ultimately will take, some of them could be still modified and sent out there. And we're going to get into that. And hopefully if those end up passing both chambers, he has the courage to put a stop to it. And they don't have the numbers, hopefully, to then override any vetoes. And that's where we need people on the conservative side of the aisle to also hold the line, because, heaven forbid if some of these conservatives on the Republican sides of the aisle were to jump ship and kind of join forces over there, it could be a bad recipe. So let's hope that cooler heads prevail in there. I wanted to get into some of these bills and some of these updates, because for our listeners who may not know, Nevada has legislative sessions every 2 years. So every odd-numbered year, they meet for a period of about 4 months. It's a mixed blessing, in my opinion, because I don't want professional lawmakers that perpetually make laws year-round, 5 to 7 days a week. But at the same time, when you have a 4-month window, there tends to be this chaotic, I'm just going to rush in bills and get something done, because they want to report to their constituents. Look at all the things that I did. And half the time I'm looking at some of these silly bills, and I've highlighted them on this show, frivolous ones where people just want to get something passed so they can report back to their home base that they did something. When I'm of the persuasion that for every new law you create, you should probably get rid of 2 or 3 bad ones, because there's just so many things on the books right now. But what we're going to talk about, some of these bills, they have huge ramifications for our citizens. So is there a bill that you wanted to kind of talk about, because now you're involved with the election cycle. So
I've got quite a few I'd like to touch base on. And before I start, I want to encourage your listeners to go on the state of Nevada website and search under Nellis, Nelis.
Yes.
If you click on that link, you will be able to follow the bills that are out there. You can read the extracts of those bills and actually read the full bill as it was submitted. It's also a way for you to put in your comments and indicate opposition for or against a bill.
Yeah.
And they actually look at those and they count the fors and against.
Right.
Now they know that there's going to be some bills are going to have a little bit more weight of conservatives being against them, and there's going to be bills that they know they're going to have more weight of the liberals in support of them. But I think if you don't speak up, then you're basically accepting the inevitable.
Yeah, and it's a super easy process for the listeners as well. I have a link on our site, thenevadapatriot.com. It actually says on our site, take action on bad bills. There's a link right when you land on that page. It's the exact page that Mark is talking about. The registration process is very simple. First, last name, I think your address. You don't even have to put a phone number. You just have to have an email address. You verify your email address is legit, and you're logged into their system, and you can begin commenting, like you said, right? I think up to 2,000 characters.
Yep, 2,000.
And also voting for or against the measure. And like you said, where there's massive amounts of opposition to something, or support, if there's a good one, like AB 88 that you touched on, Greg Hafin's bill, they'll look at it, right? So if you're causing a big, massive stink about something that's bad, I think they're going to pay attention, because at the end of the day, most of them want to be elected again and don't want to do stuff that's overtly offensive to the masses. So make your voices heard on that.
That's
right?
for sure. So let's talk to some of them that I think are particularly egregious. The first one that I'd like to talk about is AB 242. Basically, this bill requires that a vote cast in person must be cast using a mechanical voting system and not by the marking of a paper ballot. And considering that Nye County was the only county in the last election to go fully to paper ballots, except for the machines, this presents a little bit of a problem for us. And I think it's a little bit of an overreach.
Yeah.
You consider the fact that 68% of the ballots were cast using paper through the mail. All
Correct.
we were doing is going the next step to the remaining 32% of the ballots and making those paper ballots.
Right.
If you look at it, we had, in 2017, we bought 132 electronic touchscreen voting machines.
Right.
Shortly after that, after we went through one election, 2018, and lo and behold, in 2020, they implemented universal mail-in ballots by legislation,
Yes.
with 53% of the voters using them in the first election, where you had a choice as to mail-in ballot or go in person, which was the 2020 general election. 53% of the voters voted with paper ballots. Well, immediately you've now, within one election cycle, reduced your capacity needs by 50%, right?
Right.
Those machines were bought when everybody voted in person.
Yeah.
And so you needed all those machines for early voting because you had, in the last election, 14,000 more people
Right.
that, voted.
Aside from absentee ballots, I mean, that was the way they had to.
Yeah, absentee
vote.
ballots were
Yeah.
peanuts relative to
Right.
the
Yeah,
grand
for sure.
scheme of things. So my understanding is that the people that are concerned about this most are those that use a ballot marking device. There are machines out there that print out your ballot on a paper, and it looks just like a paper ballot, and then they take that and stick it in a tabulator. And so those counties are more concerned about this than Nye County. They really don't care about Nye County because Nye County has made their lives a little more difficult because people are asking the clerks in other counties, well, why aren't you doing that here? And so by reducing the number of machines we need, I'm looking to save the county over $75,000
Yeah.
in license and warranty fees. And because we'll talk about SB 215, but if this gets implemented, I'd have to go back and sign the deal again to pay the license and warranty fees on those machines so that I could have
Right.
all machines at the polls. In some counties, I can understand why they might not want to go to paper. Like Clark County is pretty huge.
Yeah.
But in other counties, or counties like Nye County, it's a 5-hour drive from one polling location to another.
Yeah.
That's a lot of machines to haul around to Duckwater, now to Yamba, up there near Austin, the very northern reaches of our county. Now
Right.
we have a polling place there just to serve the, I think it's 23 registered voters in that area.
Yeah.
And
We have a massive county. It's the
we have
size
a
of
massive
some
county,
states.
and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of
Yeah.
energy to drag those machines around. So it really reduces our flexibility. And you consider the fact that, again, 32% of the voters vote in person.
Yeah.
And that's not that many ballots to manage. So I believe that if this actually goes through and focuses right on Nye County, I believe our governor will veto this, and I'm going to be very pushing for it if this comes out of committee. Something tells me that this one is going to have so much opposition. Matter of fact, it was on the agenda for yesterday, and they knew that there was a massive number of people willing to speak up in opposition.
If you
to
look at
this.
that one on Nellis, like we're talking about to the listeners, that one I think it showed it was close to 99% against.
Right.
And I know like on a bill like that, you might have more conservatives like myself maybe wanting to put in their 2 cents and vote no against it. But with those kind of numbers, those overwhelming percentages, I mean, you got to think that almost any reasonable thinking person is probably going on there and voting against it. So
Yeah,
let's hope that one does.
let's hope for
because
that.
I highlighted that bill on a show several weeks back, and when I first read that suggested bill when it came out, I think it came out sometime in the month of February or was first introduced then, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the end of February or maybe middle, I forget. But whenever it was introduced, I just, maybe because I live in Nye County, I'm like, is this bill just written Written completely,
I kind of think so. Don't you think so?
Specifically for us?
I think it was. Another one like that is SB 215. Okay. And I testified on this last week. But what was interesting is how these bills are written. This one was clarified that this would only apply to money given to counties for machine voting equipment. Basically what this bill says is if we give you money for voting machines and you change your mind anywhere along the way and decide to not use those voting machines, go to paper ballots, then you got to pay the money back. When I first saw this, I was like, well, wait a second. This seems like it's again directed right at Nye County. But this actually came out of committee based back in September. So just so that you're aware, in that interim period, there's committees out there that are still working on legislation.
They're kind of working.
They're still doing
in the background,
doing their thing. So in this case, I was concerned that we would have to pay the money back, and so I'm in the middle of negotiating for a cheaper license and warranty fees to save the county some money here. And lo and behold, I get surprised with this. It turns out this is only on a go-forward basis. It's not retroactive.
Good.
So it'd be for any dollars that are coming up. And the state knows that by 2015, once we get past the 2024 election, our equipment will be pretty much technologically obsolete anyhow.
And the realm of electronics, I mean, look at iPhones, whatever else. You're antiquated after a few years anyway on some technologies.
Right.
So I mean, because where would the cutoff be if we decided not to do it 20 years down the line? Are they going to come back and say you got to reimburse us full market value on these machines that are 20 years old?
That's the whole point.
That would have never made any kind of sense.
That was the whole point I made. Once I found out that this was not going to be retroactive, I wasn't so upset about it.
Yeah.
But my concern is there was no amortization of costs. So in other words, it's to have a 5-year technological life. Like most equipment, computer equipment, 5-year technological life for tax purposes if you're going to write it off, right?
Yeah.
So follow the tax law. Or at least have a provision for technological obsolescence. If the newest sliced bread comes along and you've got a law that says if you don't use that machine, but you want to use the new one, but you got to pay the money back in full, well, that's another story altogether.
Yeah.
So,
and just so our listeners know as well, like even during the last election where we did a lot of there was the in-person ballots that people were filling out there. We still had the ADA compliant voting machine there. We had accommodations that were reasonable. I thought we kind of went above and beyond accommodating all these facets, and then still, lo and behold, it seems like some of these bills kind of come out of the legislative session or right before it starts.
Well, it's kind of interesting if you look at the way machines were used last in the general election. We did two things. One, made sure we had a machine that was ADA accessible. We denied no one access to that machine. If somebody comes up and says, I need to use that machine, we let them use it. We also, in the last election, provided for 2 separate lines. If you recall in the past, it was one line to get into the Bob Root Center, and if you were there with a walker or a wheelchair, you were relying on somebody from the clerk's office to come in and say, hey, come to the front of the line.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, actually, the law says you got to provide 2 lines, and so we provided 2 lines this time. And we went from, on the machines, the ADA accessible machines, 16 people using them in the primary to 249 people using them in the general election. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay.
Right on.
All right. A bill that is, you're aware that unfortunately the voters in this state voted by about 3% to support ranked choice voting in primaries, which is, to me, we might as well just put the hammer and sickle out on the front door and we just call ourselves a socialist country, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I highlighted that, I think, on one of my shows right before the November election, kind of telling everybody to tell their friends, neighbors that's not what it's. The benefits of a bill like that aren't anything near what they're being packaged as, if there is any benefit at all. They always want to package it like, oh, well, the little guy can have a chance. Well, I think the little guy's going to have probably no chance in a ranked choice. Like if you're a third party independent, you're going to have a couple major party candidates, possibly from both of the major of the two parties advancing, and almost leave no room for a third party candidate or a nonpartisan to even make it. And at the end of the day as well, I think that process of a partisan primary is a healthy thing for the two major parties to do, to focus on their best candidate.
So, in anticipation of ranked choice voting, AB 95 was submitted, and it requires every candidate to get a petition of candidacy. So, currently, if you run as a registered Republican or a Democrat, you can sign up, pay your fee, and be placed on the ballot in the primary as a Democrat or a Republican and be chosen by your constituents.
Right.
If you are nonpartisan or an independent candidate, or basically nonpartisan. If you're independent, you're selected by your party. Mm-hmm. If you're nonpartisan, you have to get 100 signatures to get on the ballot, and you go directly to the general ballot.
Right.
AB 95 would require every candidate to get the 100 signatures. So, as a Republican, if you're running against 4 other people, you not only have to get the 100 signatures, but you also have to run for office.
Right.
So, what this is doing is saying, well, to people, why would I want to do that when I can just get, for $100 of fee, I can go and do my petition and get 100 signatures, go right on the ballot. A lot easier than campaigning.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, for the clerk's office, in the last primary, we had 68 unique county candidates who would have had to get the 100 signatures.
Right.
And if you look at the timing of when someone can register versus the timing of when we have to submit our certified list of candidates, it's about a 21-day period. That means the clerk's office in the primary, in the midterm, would have to verify 6,800 signatures in a 3-week period, with no acknowledgement of the cost of doing that.
Right.
We don't have the resources in this county to be able to do that. In the last general election, it was around 33 candidates, because in a a presidential year election, there's less county-wide races on the ballot. Mm-hmm. So there's less number of candidates. That you've got some school board districts, some commission districts, but a lot of the elected officials are on a different cycle.
Yeah. So the encumbrance is not only on individual candidates to go out there and collect all those signatures. I call them unfunded mandates or unmanned mandates, because they're asking the smaller counties to either do stuff that costs more money or costs more time, labor, and intensive effort. And it seems like they don't care when they propose these bills. They're in the little vacuum up there in some kind of weird utopia, and not realizing that these bills would have major ramifications, especially on the counties that aren't, at least population-wise, gigantic, and you don't have the manpower in almost any of the counties in Nevada.
Well, even in a county like Washoe County, when you've got so many general improvement districts within there. I think they have over 300 different GIDs within Washoe County. And, it's just an incredible number of signatures that they would have to verify. So, AB 95, it's a real stinker. Please come out against that one.
We'll add that to the list, and we're going to provide, there'll be graphics on the show. Anybody watching our show on Rumble or YouTube, we're highlighting the bad bills, such as that one, so that you can go on to Nellis and voice your opposition to that. And also, there's ways on there to reach out to these candidates, or not candidates, these officials in Carson City directly via email and even phone calls to reach out to to not only your representative or our representative here in our district, but you can actually reach out to all these committee people that are presiding over these bills. And for the listeners that don't quite understand, a lot of these bills that are proposed, they're in what's called committees up in Carson City before they get presented for a floor vote. So hitting them hard now and not waiting until it gets to that point where there's votes on the floor to help them realize the error of their ways right now before they get out of committee, this is the time to do it.
That's for sure. We were talking about AB 246, which is an interesting bill. Right now, under the Vote America Act, they created a situation where, from a federal point of view, where there's a formula for whether or not a county within the United States has to provide their ballot information in multiple languages other than English. And currently within the state of Nevada, Clark County is the only county that meets those guidelines.
Right.
So they're required to provide ballots in English and in Spanish, and then they also provide them in Chinese and Tagalog, and I don't know all the extent of all the languages that they're required to do as a result of that federal law. Now, Washoe County, even though they're not required, is providing ballots in both English and Spanish.
Gotcha.
This bill, as originally written, which kind of blew my mind and that wasn't discussed yesterday much, is that if you got a population less than 100,000, so that would be most of the rurals, Nye County included.
Yeah, almost all of them.
It said if the county finds that there are at least 500 registered voters in the county who are members of the minority group and are of limited English proficiency, we would have to provide all of our voting materials.
Wow.
Ballots, sample ballots, communications, anything we put in the paper, anything that we have on our website, phone numbers to call into for assistance, all would have to be done in those languages. And it sets some pretty high goals for the state. Now, the state, under this bill, would be forced to provide everything in Spanish, of course, for all the statewide candidates. So even if we did not have to do that for our candidates, the statewide candidates, so that increases your printing costs, your translation costs. This bill requires us to use a translator who's certified in the specific language. Okay. Now, our new Secretary of State, Mr. Aguilar, is from Hispanic descent, and obviously there's going to be little fighting this bill. Fortunately, they were able to increase that number of registered voters who are not proficient in who have limited English proficiency to 5,000 in an amendment to this proposed bill. So that's
within the county limit.
Within the county limit. Okay. So that kind of takes us off the hook. That's half of the federal requirement of 10,000. So if you have 10,000 of a certain language federally, then you have to provide your materials in that language, and therefore Clark County. But 500 would definitely put a burden on Nye County. The estimated cost, just off the top of their head, to the taxpayers of this, at the state level, is $8 million.
Wow. With
no idea of what this could do to the counties if implemented as written.
Right. Yeah, because for the listeners that don't know, I mean, when these, especially in the system now, where all the, when the ballots go out in mass, and even before all these laws change, and we all got our sample ballot, just adding a couple extra pages probably per mail-in or per sample ballot costs our county money, right? If I'm not mistaken.
It costs a lot.
So every time you add one layer to one small slice of a difference on the ballots, you're talking the county could potentially having to spend money. You implement something like this bureaucratic nightmare, in my opinion, and you're talking. I have no idea what that would turn out to be. Even
if it's not an unfunded mandate, and the state pays for it, guess who's paying for them?
Yeah, we're all
paying for them.
Yeah, we're all paying.
One way or the other. And
Absolutely.
Nye County, however, is one of the only counties that met that federal requirement for providing language services to the Shoshone Indian tribes in Duckwater and Yamba.
Oh, okay.
But we're only required to make sure that there is someone who can translate at the polls. And we were able to make arrangements in Duckwater and Yamba to have someone there who can translate the ballot in Shoshone, because Shoshone is not a written language.
Right.
So the only way
different.
we can do that is through translation.
Yeah.
I do acknowledge the fact that we need to do a better job in Nye County of providing language services for those people of limited English proficiency, particularly Spanish.
Sure.
I'm going to go do my best to try to get at least several Spanish-speaking poll workers here in Pahrump at a minimum, and other locations if possible. Finding, and we'll just do that through outreach. Just like in the last election, we increased the number of non-Republicans who worked in the polls by specifically going out and targeting.
And that's the thing. When you have a good leader in place, when you have good county clerks like we have in our county, and in the other counties, this top-down control and compelling them almost at gunpoint, it seems, when they pass these laws. That's what it is, because you're compelled now by statute that you have to do certain things. When they don't realize that certain good ideas that are helpful to the community, let the clerks kind of implement their own policies, procedures, common sense things. That's what we, the voters, are electing, and that's what the government. That's what a representative government is supposed to do, right? You're representing us, and keeping government control at the local levels is so much better than the state or the national level, because all the unintended consequences, like what you're talking about, like when they write certain laws, maybe some certain lawmakers at the national level or outside of our state don't realize there's tribes in Nevada that you've already met certain concerns and met their needs because they don't have a written language. So every time they're making these laws and compelling us to follow suit, they don't even know the whole picture. But you being local in our county, that's the whole idea, by keeping your leaders local and not clipping their wings and letting them do what we've elected them to do. And it seems like the top-down form of our government wants to always combat that.
Well, the tribes have quite a bit of influence in our government, and they are pushing for us to be able to use their tribal ID, which I agree with. We need to change our systems to be able to enter that data into our statewide systems with the tribal ID.
Right.
But also to encourage other counties to provide translation services and better support and more coordination with the Indian tribes that Nye County has done.
And I think they will, if they're good ideas and you're talking amongst yourselves, and these good ideas can spread to other counties without the need for these mandates coming, from the state level down on top of you. I think you guys are going to be doing a better job. So hopefully certain bills like that, if they make it through, they get modified even further, or they don't have these unintended consequences. Because that threshold of 500, that would have been really concerning, because and then you're trusting the mechanisms by which people are being identified, and those systems are kind of unknown quantities as well. So how does that work? How will the county or other officials determine who's not proficient enough? And so they're building in all this gray area, I think, in their policies. And how would that flesh out in the real world?
Yeah, that's again. I think it's a good thing. I want to make sure that, but I don't want to spend the taxpayers' dollars.
Right.
There's a little bit more of a cynical part of me that says, instead of spending that money on translation services, maybe we ought to spend the money on improving our education system.
Absolutely.
Basically, also this says that material has to be understandable at a 4th grade level. So I'm sure that Clark County would be happy with that.
Yeah, we need that.
They need it. Their school system is so bad.
It is. And on that note, real quick, we're going to take a fast little break, but when we get back, we'll continue our discussion here. with our county clerk, Mark Kampf. Stick around. Veterans Crisis Line. Dial 988. Veterans Crisis Line. Dial 988. Then press 1. Someone is available who cares. Someone is available who will listen. Someone is available who will help. Veterans Crisis Line. 988. Thank you for standing by here at the Nevada Patriot Podcast. Thank you for enjoying this discussion with us with Mark Kampf. So we're going to move on to another bill or several here, hopefully,
Yes.
If we have time here, for sure.
Well, these two are kind of like need to be read together.
Yeah.
One is called AB 286, and the other is SB 162. So let me just read the words that each county clerk, county sheriff, and person who administers the jail of a city in the county shall coordinate to establish one polling place in each county and city jail exclusively for prisoners in the jail who are registered voters in the county to vote in person on the day of the primary election, presidential preference primary election, or general election.
Wow.
If they are located in another county, the county clerk shall coordinate with the sheriff or person who administers the jail of the city as applicable to establish a polling place for those prisoners.
Wow.
Now, AB 286 takes it a little bit further and goes beyond jails, and it calls for detention facilities for children, regional facilities for treatment and rehabilitation of children, and the state facilities for the detention of children. Basically, you could be 17 when you got put into the detention facility, approaching 18, and you could be entitled to vote, and so you'd have to provide for that. My understanding is that this bill was intended for us to assist voters in getting their ballots in the prisons. So in other words, make it easier for them to get a mail ballot.
Yeah.
But foolish me, I tend to read the words that are written, and the words that are written say that I need to provide a polling location. So can you imagine, who am I going to get as a poll worker to go to the jail over here?
Right.
And sit down in front of those individuals and work out a system so that they can check in, sign the poll pad, give me their ID, get a ballot,
right,
receive that ballot. It's a lot of contact with a prisoner that I'm going to be asking a poll worker to do. And, look at the demographic of our county.
Yeah. And the logistics also, because we have one of our jails here that's not the Nye County Detention Center, the other one, the Core Civic one.
Mm-hmm.
I know
it's got a jail in Tonopah.
Yeah, and you got federal inmates, and not all the federal inmates are from different states. You're having people from Las Vegas and maybe even counties out in Nevada that are going to be housed there. So Nye
County. If I've got a Nye County
in Clark County.
Somebody
You'll have
there.
a polling place at CCDC and on Casino Center in Las Vegas.
I think they had good intentions of this.
Right.
Was to provide people who were not yet considered felons, because you could have somebody who's sitting in jail waiting to be tried
until it's adjudicated. You
still have your rights to vote.
Your rights.
So
maybe that one ends up being one that hopefully will kind of fizzle out here, because maybe they didn't think it completely through and put the cart a little bit, before the horse, I think.
Well, it just seems to me like, just not considering the impact. I just can't even imagine how this would work, trying to figure out who from Nye County is in what jail all over this state.
It's difficult.
Yes,
because then it's so easy, and if you don't have a system that's efficient at it, you find yourself in violation of what will be NRS, and that's a scary situation to not really have a good system, or not even a potential possible system that you could implement and then be violated. It's like setting up a law that you can't help but be breaking, and it's just not well thought out.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, as is with many of these.
Yep.
So anyhow, the last one I want to talk about today is AB 394, and this says, it prohibits, with certain exceptions, the counting of ballots more than once. So in other words, if there's a recount or there's a court order that says you have to count those ballots, yes. But I could not do a parallel hand count.
Right, and that's another one of those bills. I think the alarm's going off. Like, are they talking about?
I think they're talking about Nye County here.
Specifically us.
Specifically. Now, based on my experience, I don't think we need with the tabulators to do a full parallel hand count. If we were, there's a lot of problems with that. Number one, the reporting requirements that you have to do and the data that you need to provide to the state is very difficult when you're doing a 100% hand count of paper ballots. There's no way to meet their reporting requirements. So the tabulation process is necessary. However, I kind of envision doing a significant statistical sample at a batch level. And when I talk about a significant, I'm not talking about a 2 or 3%. I'm talking about 10, 15, 20% of the batch is selected randomly, so that you're looking at an entire batch, go through the hand count procedure, and check your results. This would not allow me to do that.
Right. And if nothing else, I think a lot of times, I mean, like you said with the tabulators, that they're pretty reliable. So ideally, it should give us more confidence in our election system if you had a system like that where you do a parallel hand count or even a batch parallel hand count, to where it can give us confidence, like, hey, well, wait a minute, these are reliable results.
Right.
But in a bill like this seemingly wants to take that confidence out of the process. And I want to go on every election, every time, and be confident that was a fair election. And they want to take this away from us.
This bill says that our processes are so perfect that there's no need to check anything. Now, under state law, we're required to do what's called a risk limiting audit. And the state provides us the document number based on a cast vote record, which is basically a numerical listing of all the votes that occurred in the system and how that vote was voted. The state gives us a very small sample. My understanding is 5 to 10 ballots. You pull those ballots and make sure that those ballots match what's in the system. That's not even a statistically significant sample. It's, as far as I'm concerned. It's just to make sure that there isn't a total meltdown in the system and it's not accurate. Right. But I have a real problem with, by legislation, telling me as a clerk I cannot do a verification of the results prior to submitting those results to the county commission.
Because at the end of the day, you want to be comfortable in your position, that when you sign off on something, and because at every election, obviously you're putting your stamp of approval, that you're believing that this is as fair as we can get it, and you above all people want to have confidence that when you're attaching yourself to it and you're stamping it through, that the process was correct.
Right, and I think we were able to prove that the tabulating process is reasonably accurate if you take into consideration the sensitivity settings on reading the ballots.
Yeah.
In the future, I've learned my lesson. I'm going to dial down those sensitivity settings so that more ballots are adjudicated based on what the machine sees versus what a human was able to see.
Right.
But I still would prefer to be able to verify those systems, because I like the paper ballots. The tabulation is fast and easy.
Yeah.
To do a recount, if anybody has to do a recount, you're not pulling out the little rolls of paper.
Right.
And many of the counties are going to mobile, these ballot printers where you touch screen the machine and then it prints out a paper ballot. And that was part of the problem with the eliminating the paper ballots at the polls, because some of the counties already use these ballot printers where you touch a screen, you vote, and then you get your paper ballot, you look at it, and you say, okay, I like that. They stick it in a tabulator right then and there. So this is basically using a paper ballot at the polls. So the law is affecting counties that are already using machines. They're not concerned about Nye County, who uses all paper ballots. They're just concerned about their situation. And so it's possible that, for example, like the bill to exclude paper ballots would only apply to Nye County.
They're catering it for us.
Just like this.
How nice of them.
Because there's no one else that did this except us.
Yeah, and also maybe to set the precedent or set the tempo to kind of I don't want to say discourage, but I'm kind of a pessimist when it comes to certain things that you see. You know, I'm born and raised out here, so you see generation by generation, or decade by decade, you're seeing things kind of degrading, and this is just another thing in those long list of things that are happening in my state, that it's just like, if they just would just settle down, pump the brakes, and just be hands off, and let clerks like you do your job, you know. And the misinformation that's out there also, I wanted to address this with the listeners, is there's a significant amount of people out there that think that, like the last go round, that we didn't have a tabulator, like an actual machine that counted the ballots. I think there was some confusion even with some folks that I talked to, that we were just, you know, oh, those darn, you know, town folk in there, and they're all just counting and not using the tabulator, which we did. So I just want to put that out there, that the votes were counted.
Well, it's kind of interesting
that way, you know,
because there's been a lot of discussion about clerks and election officials being targeted and hassled and threatened. And I felt, as a clerk, I was being targeted, hassled, and threatened by the ACLU. And I'm still being targeted, having to do public information requests that are ridiculously out of control. I've been spending probably personally at least 60 hours just working on redacting documents since I got that request. It's just gobbling up our time. And so to me, there's a real concerted effort to say, if you think outside the box, if you try to do anything different, we're going to make sure that we slap your hand. And
the end goal for groups like that, unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way, but it seems like it's just company line. If you're not towing the company line, they're coming after you, and it's the actual opposite of civil liberties. Your civil liberties are being under siege by groups like that oftentimes, and that's not. Well,
it's a groupthink sort of thing here, and again, many of the clerks don't like what I've done because it puts them on the spot. People are asking them, well, why aren't you doing that?
Right.
And the old electronic voting machines with the little thumb drives, once you get beyond the setting them up and dragging them all over this county and paying the fees on them and everything else, the vote counting on election night, piece of cake, got it done. But heck, we had 90% of the ballots tabulated on an election night anyhow. Look at Clark County, only had about 50% of their ballots tabulated on election night.
Because it really affected my race, because my race that I was in myself actually affected, you know, a large part of Nye County, Pahrump, obviously, but then also dipped into a section of the western part of Las Vegas and the northwestern part of Las Vegas. And my election was relatively close. So you imagine me being just really on edge then as the numbers were coming in to see if I was going to close that little gap. And it was vexing because, like you said, it seems like the data, it took longer out there. And meanwhile, I mean, we're not a gigantic county, but we're not tiny like Esmeralda.
No.
And we were able to still get our stuff together. Despite some last second logistics, it seems like it came in and they dumped new procedures on you on how you were able to do oversee the parallel hand counting and all that stuff. Right. So they made all these extra, and even despite that, we still were able to get our stuff together.
17,000 some odd ballots counted in time.
Which is good.
Yeah, I feel that when you question anything in our society anymore, you become a target.
Yeah.
If you challenge the status quo in any way, it gives people the opportunity to criticize. And for example, like the whole confusion over the counting the ballots.
Right.
I believe that the ACLU and our local newspaper did a great job of confusing the citizens as to what was going on because of their poor reporting.
Yeah.
If you look at on election day, before we even tabulated the ballots, the headlines in the paper said, unlikely that we will be able to get our ballots and votes counted on time.
Yeah, they're casting.
They had the article and the headline in the paper before we even got there.
Yeah.
They knew what they wanted to say. They had their agenda. Mm-hmm. And what they didn't retract was that it all worked just fine. And we had no problems. But by creating confusion in the mind of the voters, I think it affected the election.
It very well could have.
There was a lot of confusion. The ACLU was on the channel 13 News, I believe it was, and they were saying that the problem with our counting process was that you could see how your neighbor voted. And the news was spreading this, how awful it was that we were revealing people's votes. That's not the case, because nobody's signature or identifying mark is on a ballot. Matter of fact, if we find a ballot that's got an identifying signature, guess what? That gets pulled out and that doesn't count.
Yeah.
You cannot mark anything on that ballot, write your name, your phone number, sign it or anything else, and that ballot gets pulled.
It's an unfortunate thing when you talk about, in my opinion, the media, if the media was and journalists were doing their 100% job on really what their purpose is, it's not always about overtly lying through the media. Sometimes it's just withholding a little bit of information or relying on a perception on how something's going to be received and then not doing anything to kind of retract that or get ahead of it to say, okay, well, the reader's going to read this and they're going to make a false assertion. Well, that false assertion we're cool with, so let's just take our hands off and let it happen. That's again the pessimist in me, which is just how I'm wired. But it just seems like we're seeing more and more of that, and it's a shame because when I was a kid, you could easily go out and you find good objective news, and then we the people could kind of take that news for how we wanted to form our own opinions. But nowadays, it just seems like through the art of omission, more often than not, the media can kind of sway the discussions, and then you bring in big tech and their censorship and all that other stuff that they do, and it's a whole different ball game now. And and I'm thankful we have people like you that are willing to stand in the gap, because I don't know if folks know this, but it's not as if you had to have a career like this in order to better your life financially and all that. You've had a successful business career. You really were putting your yes on the table to do a service for the community. And I think it's duly noted, and it doesn't go without recognition. And I just want our listeners to know that throughout the process, you've obviously had my support of almost every person that I talk to, and I hope and I pray that you don't stop fighting for doing the right thing. And it's by nature, it's not a partisan job. It's a do the right thing or do the wrong thing type job. The county clerk, and I think you're definitely doing the right thing. So
I've been involved in more battles than I can really talk about today.
Yeah, I bet.
And that are totally unnecessary. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting that when you're over the target, people get really they act different. They get aggressive. They
do.
accuse you of things that are flat out lies. Anything they can do to discredit you because you must be getting close to the right answer.
Because otherwise they ignore you, right?
Now, I'm not done with regard to the registration system, because to me, I'm mostly concerned about the registration system in our state.
Yeah.
The election system, largely, by and large, offline.
Yeah.
The registration system is completely connected to the internet.
Yeah.
There is, although there are controls over access to it, anything that's connected to the internet can be accessed and hacked.
Yeah, anytime there's a network or connection.
To me, it's the registration system that's the biggest problem that we have, that we need to face. And once I get done people throwing logs in the road, for me, I'm going to really be digging into that whole process.
Yeah, well, don't give up. Don't give up at all. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. So I want to thank you again, Mark, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. This is probably the time of the season where you're more busy than most times, and we appreciate that. And, like we talked about earlier, listeners, get involved with some of these bills that we're talking about. We're going to leave not only graphics, but on the description of the video on the site, we're going to label these actual bills out that we addressed today. Go ahead, Mark.
There's one thing I just want to say is that if you suffer in silence, you're going to get what you get.
That's right.
If you don't like this, if you don't like what's going on, and there are so many bills out there that are just, I haven't even touched the surface of the bad bills that are out there in this legislature. If you don't speak up, if you sit back in your nice, comfortable chair and watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy every night and say, gee, I wish it wasn't like this, and you're going to get what you deserve. Doesn't take much effort to even just put your opinion in. You don't have to. All you got to say is, I do not approve of this bill. Put it in writing. It's a simple process. Pick up the phone. Simple process. They have to know that you don't want this, because there's still more rural counties than there are Clark and Washoe.
That's true.
And those people in those counties have a lot of power and a lot of influence.
They do. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Mark, for staying by, and thank you, listeners, for sticking by the Nevada Patriot podcast here. I want to give our site one more time, all useful resources, information how you can jump in the game, get involved, not only with the bad bills, so I'm a pessimist, but there's also a reason to be optimistic. There are some good ones out there. AB 88 is just one of them off the top of my head. Take the time, voice your support for a bill like that. That is the one that is going to hopefully give us voter ID. Answers some of the objections at the other side, or that people that don't want to see voter ID objections they have are actually kind of resolved during that bill. So take the time to voice for the few good ones out there, and please stand in the gap against those bad ones. So again, for Mark Kampf, I'm Matt Sadler with the Nevada Patriot Podcast. God bless you.
Thank you for listening. Tell a friend and join us next time. After you catch your breath, check out the NevadaPatriot.com for more content, advertising opportunities, and to give listener feedback. That website again is the NevadaPatriot.com. Until next time, Patriots, stay American.